Hi, everyone. I'm Bill Benjamin. Thanks to those of you who've joined us early. With me is Elisa Johnson and the folks from our marketing team, as you can see, are doing fancy marketing with their emoji. We're going to start in a few minutes, and we'll do the formal introductions then. In the meantime, we would love to hear where you're all calling in from or linking in from. So on your panel there should be Casey, there's a chat feature for them, right?
That's right, yes.
Okay, so if you want to just chat and say where you're calling in from, that we'd love to hear. Johnstown in Ontario. Okay, now this is terrible, because I'm from Burlington, Ontario. I don't know where Johnstown is. Casey, do you know where that is?
No, I'm not sure.
Oh, I'm gonna have to look that up. Well, welcome. We got Edmonton. We got San Francisco. That's Elisa. That's where you are.
Yes, that is.
Yeah. Waukegan, Illinois. Tanya's from there. That's not too far from me here in Chicago. And we've got a number of people from Ontario. That's great. Lynchburg, Virginia. Awesome. We got someone in Ohio. For those who are just joining, we're going to start just in a couple of minutes. While we're doing that, we're just checking in where folks are from. If you want to share in the chat. Oh, from England. Celia, or Maria, Celia, I hope I pronounced your name correctly. But that's great. Good evening, because it's a little bit later in England than it is here in Chicago. Dallas, I was just there last week in Richardson. Oh, hey, Richard from New York. Hey, great to see you. We've got lots of folks that, some folks who we know and are good friends with, and others who are new to IHHP. Oh my goodness, we have someone from Nice, France. I'm not even going to try to pronounce your name, but welcome. What a beautiful place. I have been there, and it's absolutely a fantastic place. All right, for those who are just joining, we're going to start momentarily. As you know, most people log on with like 1 minute or 1 minute to go or 1 minute left. We're going to honor those who got here on time and start about 1 minute after. In the meantime, we're asking folks to go in the chat and tell us where they're dialing in from or logging in from, I guess is the case. I love that we have people from Europe and all over the country and Canada. Regina, Saskatchewan. Okay, very good. Lansing, Michigan. Not too far from here in Chicago. Casey, what time do you have? I don't have we're at 12:01.
Oh, 101.
And then another person from New York City and from Texas. All right, well, we're gonna officially start. Again, we really like to honor the people who get here on time. Casey, I know you have a few introductory comments for us.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. So hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on how emotional intelligence drives innovation and agility. As Bill said, my name is Casey. I'm part of the marketing team here at IHHP, and I'm going to be the behind-the-scenes support for the webinar. So just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. As part of this interactive webinar, we will be using both polls and the chat box. And if you do have a question, please feel free to use the Q&A function. Buttons for all of those features should be located at the bottom of your screen. So without further delay, allow me to introduce today's host, Bill Benjamin.
Great, well, welcome. I'm so excited that you've all invested the time to join us today. And I'm especially excited because it isn't just me. I am joined by Elisa Johnson. And Elisa works for a client of ours, and she is the Vice President of Human Capital there. And she's from Brown & Tolan Physician Services. And one of the first things that Elisa did when she joined Brown & Tolan, and how long ago did you join them, Elisa?
I joined in August officially, but I was doing some consulting work a little bit before then, which is when I had introduced emotional intelligence back in June for this organization. Yeah.
So one of the first things she did was take the leadership team and the board through emotional intelligence training. Elisa is certified, And correct me if I'm wrong, but your board and leadership team consist of a number of physicians, correct?
Yes, so certainly the board is all physicians because we're a physician-led, physician-owned organization. And our executive team is primarily of business leaders, but we do have a chief medical officer as well.
So one thing we know
a
about
really good mix and a combination, I guess, is what I'm saying. That's how versatile EI is.
Great. And so Elisa, one of the things we know about you is that you're brave and that you're willing to go in front of senior business leaders and physicians on the board and deliver emotional intelligence to them. I think the other thing that's really interesting about Elisa is because Brown & Tolan has approximately how many employees, Elisa?
Well, we've got in our network, we have around 2,600 physicians.
Okay.
And then our corporate organization is around 260 employees.
Okay, so on a scale, relatively small, medium-sized business, I think the other thing that's neat about Elisa is we actually met 7 or 8 years ago when she worked at United Health Group.
Yeah.
Where she was senior director for their accelerated leadership development program, part of their enterprise talent group. And Elisa, when you left, how many employees did they have?
So United has around, they're probably up to around 180,000 employees right now. And so I was responsible for all of their top talent, senior leader development enterprise-wide. So that covered United Healthcare and Optum, besides United Health Group, which was corporate.
Awesome. So Elisa has both, sort of smaller business experience plus also a large business experience. So Elisa, welcome. We're so excited to have you here. Let me just start out. We're good learning and development people, so we want to tell you what you're going to learn before you learn it. I'm personally very linear, so I like to know where I'm going. So in this webinar, you're going to learn why emotional intelligence is the key to agility and innovation. Thanks to so many of you who filled out our organizational challenge assessment. We're going to be sharing some really interesting data from that. We're going to talk about some brain science, and particularly, what happens to our brain under pressure that can derail our best selves, derail agility and innovation. We'll talk about an approach to being more collaborative and inclusive, which will drive agility and innovation. And finally, specific strategies you can use to get the best not only out of yourself, but to other people on your team that will drive innovation. And finally, both along the way and at the end, Elisa will be sharing some best practices, examples. One of the great things about Elisa is she doesn't only teach this to others, she's very passionate about using it for herself. So I know we'll be getting some personal examples too. All right, so I wanted to start out with what is agility and innovation, because so often I think a lot of people have different definitions for it. And so I actually, to do this, went to the dictionary. And the dictionary describes agility as the ability to move quickly and easily, to think and understand quickly. And I would just add to that, it's sort of that ability to maybe take on new ideas or try new things, especially when it feels hard. Our brain is wired to want to keep doing the same thing. And so as soon as there's something new or something different, the brain resists that. So to me, it isn't just thinking quickly and easily, it's doing it under pressure when it's hard. What about innovation? Well, innovation is a verb, and that's to introduce something new, to make changes in anything established. And it's really about being creative, finding new ways to go to market, finding new ways to do processes, building on things that exist, but also discarding the things that don't exist. And in particular, for me here, it's that ability to not be afraid, and in both of these cases, to take risks. That's what we really need people in organizations. If we're going to be agile, we need them to be open-minded, and we need them to have all of their best thinking. We also need them to feel safe taking risks and potentially failing. Elisa, do you want to add anything there from kind of what you've seen in organizations around agility and innovation?
Well, I think what I would just add, Bill, is, agility, even though we want to think about it in terms of speed so many times, speed can also mean just presence, the ability to think in the moment. And, when we think about agility in the marketplace is, for every industry these days, is moving way faster than many times what we humans can keep up with.
Mhm.
And so that opportunity, while the market is moving at this break speed pace, and we're trying to be fully present and be more nimble, it is really truly too, as you know, we'll find out how the brain works through your EI session, about how do we really even slow that down so we can actually think quicker. So there's some nuances there with I think with agility and innovation around that.
I love that point. It's almost slowing down in order to go faster.
Yes.
I really like that point. And what we're going to learn is our emotional brain, it wants us to react right away. It wants us to go
Exactly.
quickly.
Yeah, the difference between responding and reacting. Absolutely.
Great. All right. So I promised that we'd share some results from our organizational survey. And again, thanks to all of you. Many of you filled this out. We got a lot of great data. You were first asked to rank what were the biggest challenges your organizations face. And out of a list of about 15 or 20 challenges, you identified employee engagement and motivation as the number one. Recruiting and retaining talented employees is number two. And those are very much related. Continuous change and reorganization. I haven't been with a company or met a leader who hasn't said, oh my gosh, we've got a lot of change going on. It's everywhere. And we all know why with technology and reorganizations. Building a climate of trust in the organization. I love that you guys identified this one because, again, in order for people to take risks, to try new things, to be okay to fail, there needs to be trust. And that trust, that safety to try new things has to come from the leaders. So leadership development and building a strong organizational culture. And you guys really hit the mark on these. So those were the top 6, the most highly ranked. I think what's interesting is that we also, we surveyed this group, but we also have a much larger data set across many of our different clients, thousands of people from all different levels of organizations, all different, divisions, business lines. And one of the ones that they added that wasn't here is competitive pressure and industry disruption. And you guys had that, it was just a little bit lower. But I'm sure you would all agree that, yeah, that's a challenge too. And really, and by the way, the general public, our fuller data set, has that as the number 2 challenge. So again, we're not going to spend a lot of time trying to explain why agility and innovation are important. You've come on this webinar, clearly you know, but a big part of it is that competitive pressure and industry disruption. A couple of other key data points that I think kind of demonstrate how difficult it is to be agile and innovative is we asked you, do I feel comfortable taking risks in my organization? 34.6% of you agreed or strongly agreed. It means almost, over 65% of you aren't so sure about taking risks. We asked, our leaders communicate effectively with employees and encourage high performance. Only 20.7% agreed or disagreed. Agreed or strongly agreed. Many of you disagreed. How about this one? My organization operates with agility and resilience. Only 22.5%. Now, there's a lot that goes into being agile and resilient and innovative, but so much of it comes down to the leadership, the culture, and each individual leader of each person. Elise, I don't know if you want to make a comment before I move on, or
yeah, I think this is fascinating data, and it really reflects what is out there across industries and across many organizations. We still have this challenge within Brown and Tolan. I know whether you're small or large, I know that we have these challenges within United Health Group as well, and in other organizations I've been in. So it's a theme here, and this is why I believe that emotional intelligence is so critical during this time, given this age of technology, the speed of market, externally of what we've talked about, and just the fact that people everywhere are struggling with this pace of change, and particularly under pressure.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Elisa. I agree. And so what we're going to dive into now is let's look at that leadership piece. I mean, there are some organizational process and system things that can help agility and innovation, but we really want to look at it from a leadership standpoint. So now for you participants, I'm going to ask you to do a little participating. I'd like to take a moment and think of a leader that you've personally worked with that did a good job of driving agility and innovation. You felt safe to take risks. People shared ideas. You were okay to fail. And it could be somebody you currently work with. It could be somebody who was a leader for you earlier in your career, just someone that you've personally worked with. And then I'm asking you to find a pen or an iPad notepad, and I just want you to write down 3 or 4 characteristics or qualities that made that person exceptional at driving agility and innovation. So I'm going to give you a moment to do that. All right, so for those of you who have done that, we have a lot of people on the line, so we can't have everyone share in the chat. So if your first name starts with the letters A to L, I'd love you to go to the chat and just share what are some of the qualities and characteristics you wrote down about leaders that drive agility and innovation. And Elisa, maybe while we're waiting for that, why don't you share a couple of examples of what you've seen?
Absolutely. In terms of, I think what really is critical and key for driving from a leadership angle is the consistency of how we show up, regardless of the pressure. And that's not easy to do for leaders, but it is the, you know, if your teams or if your other stakeholders, when the pressure is really on and they're seeing you really fully connected, but yet seeing you with consistency on how you lead and how that shows up on your impact, that is, you know, that's really, I think, a critical characteristic in terms of driving agility and innovation, because it's about getting the best thinking out of others in that moment.
Absolutely. Great. And thank you for all of you that are filling. And by the way, if your name doesn't start with A to L, you can still go to the chat and see what everybody's putting in. So let me just share some of the things that folks have written. Open-minded, listens, is passionate about change. That's a good one. I like that. And that's not wired into us. As you're going to learn, we're wired to resist change. Supportive, accepts ideas from other people, coaches versus dictates, you know, gives feedback, collaborates, not only instructing or demanding. I like this one from Kirsty, a lifelong learner. All right, those are some great examples. So what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to take those characteristics and hold on to them for just a second. I'm going to share something on the screen, and then we're going to go back to them. And that's this, that there are 3 domains of competence that we all operate within. There's our IQ, that's how smart we are. And for most of us, if we're over the age 16, that's pretty much fixed. There's our technical skills and job knowledge. So everything you've learned to do your job. And then there's everything else that's come to be known as our emotional intelligence. So I'd just like you to look at your characteristics, and just identify which ones were about the IQ, maybe put an I beside them, which ones were about the person's technical skills or job knowledge, put a T beside that, and then which ones were about their emotional intelligence. And again, if I just listen, you know, open-minded, listens, passionate, supportive, accept ideas, coaches versus dictates, feedback, you know, I'd say for the most part, most of that falls into emotional intelligence. Okay, so hopefully you've kind of, you know, just categorized where your characteristics belong. Now we're going to do a poll. And what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to look at which of the characteristics had which IQ, technical skills, or emotional intelligence had the highest percentage of characteristics that you wrote down. So if 3 out of 4 was IQ, you're going to click IQ. If, you know, 2 out of 3 was emotional intelligence, you're going to click emotional intelligence. So which had the highest percentage of characteristics? All right, Casey, I'm thinking that gives folks enough time. So why don't we close the poll and see what you came up with? All right, okay. So look, it's 98% of the quality of you had the most characteristics related to emotional intelligence. And I mean, that just makes sense. And by the way, this isn't only because you're a group of people who've selected to come on an emotional intelligence session. It's what we see across all organizations at any level in any group. I've delivered this program to US Marines. I've delivered this to engineers at Intel. Elisa, when you do this with physicians, does it come out heavily weighted in IQ and technical skills?
It's interesting. It's always emotional intelligence that still comes out as the top in terms of, yes.
I used to worry when I went into highly analytical audiences. Like I just did a session for the Conference of Consulting Actuaries.
Yeah.
And I used to worry when I started doing this, oh, they're going to be high, but they're not. And the reason is because IQ and technical skills are threshold competencies.
That's right.
You need a certain amount of them, but once you get over that threshold, getting more doesn't significantly differentiate performance.
And I like what you used too there, Bill, is around, it is, you know, you want people to be technically competent, particularly if you're a surgeon in the surgery room, right?
Yes.
But when it comes to that leadership hat and leading people and as well as, you know, patient interactions, this EQ is really significant and important.
Yeah, and Elisa, I've also delivered to surgeons, and I'm sure you're aware of this research that showed that surgeons who are high in empathy and impulse control to emotional intelligence competencies, they get sued less often.
That's right. That's right.
You bet they pay attention after that, right?
Well, and it's what someone had mentioned in the chat, or what we've seen a theme around, because you're actually listening. You know, those are the ones who are listening to their patients and connecting with them and giving them the information that they need. Yep. So, absolutely.
Yep. All right. So in our training programs, and we do them both classroom and virtually, we also ask about exceptionally poor leaders who don't drive agility and innovation. And what's interesting when we do it virtually is we actually get to collect the data. And so I've got data here from one of our Fortune 25 companies, so one of the largest companies in the world. And we asked them, you know, what are the qualities and characteristics that make somebody not exceptional, and then asked them to do the same sort of IQ and technical skills and EQ. And here's what they came up with. Low IQ, those characteristics were 5.4%. Low technical skills were 7.9%. In emotional intelligence, the characteristics were 86.7%. So in other words, EI was again, not only the significant factor in exceptional leadership and driving agility, but also in poor leadership and agility. And we also got to collect the qualities and characteristics, and we made a list of the ones most commonly referred to, and I'm gonna share those with you now. And we're just gonna just watch these as they come up. Wow, right? Elisa, what comes to mind when you see this list?
Oh, wow. Well, definitely it's a challenge for organizations. Absolutely. It's a big list here.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, I think we know all of those things are going to stifle innovation and agility.
That's right.
Now, one thing we want to be really clear about is that, you know, for the large part, you know, those people are poor leaders, you know, most of the time. Most of us, though, aren't poor leaders all the time, but we also aren't exceptional all the time. And we can be kind of both our worst self and best self at times. Sometimes I show up as a poor leader. I don't listen. I think I have the right idea, and I get frustrated when people aren't listening. And then sometimes I show up really engaged and really listening and coaching. And this is really all about how can we as individuals show up most often as our best selves to drive agility and innovation. So what you just learned from this last exercise is that what's going to make the difference is our emotional intelligence. I know I used to think, and I have degrees in mathematics and computer science. I didn't properly introduce myself. And I worked at a computer software company for 14 years. And so I just, you know, when I was first in business and first getting promoted, I thought, you know, you had to be the smartest guy in the room. You had to have all the right answers. Wasn't that why I got promoted? And I've learned that that's actually not what it's about. And a great quote that kind of summarizes this idea of, is it about being the smartest person in the room, is from Warren Buffett. And he said, if you have an IQ of 150 points, sell 30 to someone else. You need to be smart, but not a genius. So thank you, Warren, for stating that, because it helps to be smart, but you can't really change that anyways. But what you really need is this idea of emotional intelligence. So if emotional intelligence is that important, what is it? Well, we have a model of emotional intelligence. And for those of you that have nieces or nephews or kids or grandkids, you might recognize this. It's like the Fisher-Price toy model. And we intentionally used it because self-awareness is at the foundation. And it runs through everything else. And if we're not aware of our emotional responses in the moment, then we just can't manage them. Once we become more aware of how our brain responds under pressure and our emotional reactions, then we can manage them. Elisa, like you said, slow down so we can go fast. Once we're managing our emotions, only then can we really connect and do a lot of the stuff that you mentioned exceptional leaders do, being open-minded, listening, supportive, coaching, right? We can't do that if we're not managing our own emotions. And finally, we get to personal leadership. That's where we do things like take a risk, try something that might fail, or give somebody feedback on their idea to make it better, even though they might not like hearing that. But we'll be so much better at those things if we've done the bottom parts of the model. People often ask, is there a definition of emotional intelligence? There's no single definition. Dan Goleman originally wrote the book back in 1996. So this isn't some fad that's going to go away. Wise organizations and wise people like Elisa are recognizing, it really is a key differentiator to exceptional leadership and to driving agility and innovation. Our definition goes like this. There's two parts. It's the ability to recognize, understand, and manage our own emotions. That's the bottom two parts of that Fisher-Price toy model. And then the ability to recognize, understand, and influence the emotions of others. That's that top two parts of the model. Elisa, before I go on, was there anything you wanted to share here?
I think that, so Bill, this is a great overview, and I just want to go back to a second about what you talked about. There are, we have our good days and bad days as leaders, certainly. And this is where emotional intelligence really just provides that nice foundation. When I think about just this morning, I had some pretty interesting feedback that came back to me. And how I responded, and probably helped too, knowing I was going into this session to partner with you too. But right away, my brain wanted to go to defensive mode for a second. And I had to stop myself and go, wait a moment, this is about, self-awareness. This person has some really good feedback to share with you. So just stop and listen here. And so I think that, this ability to recognize and understand and manage our own emotions in that moment is so critical. And as you go up higher in an organization and get more responsibility, the pressures are greater. And so this EI really is critical because you're going to have stuff flying at you every single moment, which is unexpected. And that ability to recognize and understand and manage your own emotions in that second is so critical, so that you can stop and really think and listen to what's happening.
Well, as I promised, Lisa, you're such a great role model for working on yourself first.
Not always, but but many times.
None of us are always, and that's the sort of the point. Like, we all have our worst self times. It's how can we minimize that, and can we build enough trust in the people that we lead, so that when we have our worst moments, that doesn't become defining. That's not the thing they remember.
Right.
Grace. Okay, so I wanted to just go back to the survey data, and then we're going to get into some brain science that we promised. So in addition to asking you to rank the challenges that you faced, we also asked you to rank what skills are going to be needed in order to face the challenges. And here were your rankings. Awesome group. You ranked emotional intelligence as number 1, active listening as 2, people management as 3, critical thinking, which again, if we're going to be agile and innovative, we absolutely need critical thinking and this cognitive flexibility. And finally, the 6th one was coordinating with others. And again, I love the fact that you all chose really, EI related. EI is number 1, but even, 2 and 3 EI related. Now, interestingly, in our larger data set, critical thinking was number 1, people management was number 2, but number 3 was judgment and decision making. Number 5 was cognitive flexibility, and number 6 was complex problem solving. And you might think, whoa, those all sound like, things that aren't related to emotional intelligence. But in fact, what we're about to learn is that when we are managing our emotional brain, that allows our cognitive brain to be better. So all of these things, decision-making, judgment, cognitive flexibility, all of critical thinking is reliant on emotional intelligence. Finally, we asked you, do most people in your organization skillfully manage their emotions? Wow, only 13.5% of you agreed or strongly agreed in that. So, there is work to be done. So let's dig into this a little further. Let's really get into the self-awareness. Lisa, you've talked about it, kind of what's going on in our brain when we're under pressure. And there's really 2 parts to our brain. The first one is an almond-sized part of the brain called the amygdala. And that is the part of our brain that allowed us to learn for the first time. That's how we know you can improve your emotional intelligence, because the emotional part of brain, the amygdala, can learn. So, Elisa, that defensive reaction you talked about, I sometimes experience that too. If I'm sharing an idea and somebody makes a suggestion that feels like a criticism, I'll get a little defensive. I'm not stuck with that, right? I can change that. It's not easy, but I can change it. The amygdala is also our source of emotional memory. So it remembers, especially the negative memories, right? When somebody didn't include us, or somebody didn't give us credit for their idea, or somebody disrespected us. It stores, it's like a little computer chip that stores those memories. And it answers one critical question of human survival. Elise, I know you know what that is.
Yes, you're talking about the fight or flight.
Yeah,
aspect
exactly.
Yeah.
So it's the part of our brain that's going to manage our fight or flight response that will respond to any perceived threats. All right, now let's go to the part of the brain that you're probably more familiar with. And we're going to talk about this idea of markers. That's your neocortex. That's where your IQ resides. That's where you do all your best strategizing, prioritizing, being agile, being creative, innovative. It's all in this IQ. And your prefrontal lobe is where you have working memory. And working memory is where you hold your short-term thoughts. And when you're calm, everybody can hold 6 or 7 thoughts plus or minus 2. So everybody can hold at least 4 thoughts. And that's what allows us to do complex thinking. Somebody can say something to us. We can access something from long-term memory. We can see some options, think about what we learned in that training program last week, and respond. For those of you that are computer literate, the working memory is like your RAM. If you're not computer literate, forget what I just said. It'll take up too much working memory trying to figure it out. But essentially, that working memory is like the pipeline to your IQ. Now, you'll remember that we said everyone has at least 4 places in that working memory that you can use to do your complex thinking. So here's the only math we're going to do today. And I'm going to have these 4 markers represent those places in your working memory. So Elisa, I know you know the answer to this question. When you have 4 items, how many combinations of the items are there? How many combinations of these 4 markers can you make?
You want me to answer that, so
yeah,
24 here.
That's right. 4 times 3 times 2. And by the way, when I did this for the Conference of Consulting Actuaries, I had someone come up to me and say, well, I wanted to let you know that your math was right. It's 24, but it's not combinations, it's permutations.
There you go.
Like, awesome. Thank you for that. Thank you for that important feedback. All right. So I want everybody to remember 24. All right. So here's the question. In the design of the human brain, which of these 2 parts, the amygdala or the neocortex, do you think would respond to a perceived threat first? Elisa, I know you know which part it is. It's the amygdala.
Amygdala, of course.
If you remember nothing else from this time together, remember this, that we feel before we think. We're all wired to process something emotionally before our neocortex can catch up. Now, let's say you're somewhere where this system serves you. So I want you to imagine you're out in the jungle. And I know you don't spend a lot of time in the jungle, but go with me, it's a good metaphor. Actually, Lisa, I was at a plant in central Mexico last year, and I said that about, not being in the jungle, and they're like, no, we go to the jungle. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, imagine you're in the jungle like you were last week. So imagine you're in the jungle and a tiger jumps out at you. Within 85 milliseconds, incredibly quickly. Your amygdala senses the threat from the tiger, immediately causes a cascade of chemicals into your body. Blood will move to the major muscle groups. Your heart rate increases. Your breathing shortens. You're ready for fight or flight. In addition, the amygdala will release chemicals into your brain that will start reducing your complex thinking. Have you ever heard yourself say, oh, I was so angry I couldn't think straight? Or you have that difficult conversation with a partner, spouse, and 20 minutes later, you think of all the good comebacks? Or in a business setting, you're sharing an idea and somebody senior is challenging it, and you're not articulating your best response, and afterwards you think, oh, I should have said this and I should have said that. Well, what was happening was your amygdala was feeling threatened, and it was reacting like it was a tiger. But it no longer reacts to physical threats, it now reacts to social threats, like people aren't listening to me or they're criticizing me. And what it does is it starts to reduce that working memory. Now I want to come, and when that happens, we call that an amygdala hijack. Because the amygdala can literally hijack your thinking mind, reduce your working memory, and we will move to a default behavior, whatever we've learned to survive. That's where that defensive behavior comes from. Or for me, I might start interrupting. Some people, they have more of a flight response. They shut down and don't step in where they need to. Now, I want to hear your thoughts on this, but just before we do, Elisa, I want to share go back to the markers, because this is important. There's the amygdala hijack, where we lose all our working memory, right? The tiger jumps out at us, the bus is coming at us. But more commonly what happens is something little triggers us. We get that email from that person and it feels judgmental. And we don't lose all our markers. We just drop one marker. Okay, now how many combinations are there? Elisa, how many combinations are there now?
There are only 6 combinations.
So we just lost 75% of our thinking capacity. It feels like it should only be 25%, but it's actually 75% of our, when we just drop that one marker. Think about the impact on innovation and agility when we can't see 75% of the options, right? Now, let's say we drop one more marker. Now how many options are there? Well, there's 2, right? Your way and my way. And finally, we get down to 1 and there's only one marker left. There's only one way. But as again, I said, I think the real opportunity in business is to capture ourselves when we just drop that one marker. Elisa, I want to hear your thoughts on this.
Well, I mean, in terms of with the marker dropping, first of all, I love the language around in how you use this metaphorically for the working memory that you actually end up losing when there's just that tiny situation that may have happened, whether it's an email or something bigger. You're standing up doing a presentation in front of executives or boards or a fair number of people. And right away, your amygdala wants to react and go to that fight or flight mode. I had a situation not all that long ago where I was in a meeting among my peers, and I was providing an update on some pretty emotional stuff that was happening in the organization. And I got questions just flying at me, one after the other. And so what was happening to me? I had markers dropping in that moment. And I knew that in the moment. And what was great about having this language, because our whole executive team went through emotional intelligence, when we got done with that discussion, they even asked me, they said, Elisa, how many markers did you lose during that time frame?
Yeah.
And I have to tell you, I lost 3 markers. And they were like, really? They were surprised that, because they didn't sense that I lost any markers. But I could tell in my head I was losing markers. So this play here on one, the language of, losing your complex thinking in the moment, but the other piece too of, that self-awareness is so rich and critical and important, such that people didn't even notice that I was losing my markers.
But so, you weren't able to think as clearly. You weren't able to.
I wasn't able to think as clearly, right, because I was so focused then too on managing their emotions for that moment with all the questions that were coming through.
Right, right. And if you'd had to be creative or respond agilely to something,
It would have been a challenge. Absolutely.
right. Okay.
Absolutely.
So in addition to losing the markers and losing our best thinking, a few other things happen. We become more reactive and judgmental. I mean, we're reacting to tigers, we're judging, right? We have a negativity bias. So if we know there's a tiger in the jungle and we hear wind rustling in the bushes, we assume that wind is a tiger. Well, now there's two tigers. There's the real one and there's the one we're imagining. This is why change is so hard for people, because they get a little bit of information and they amplify the negative. They assume it's not going to work out. Oh, we've done that before and it didn't work 5 years ago. And, you know, they just assume the worst. We have the narrowed thinking. We actually literally lose peripheral vision, but we also lose the ability to see options. And finally, emotions are infectious. So if we have that little bit of a response and, you know, me, I'll get a little anxious, a little panicky, a little short, well, then I'm infecting everyone else. Well, guess what? Now they're dropping markers. They can't think as clearly. We're not collaborating. We're not being innovative, right? Everybody's narrowed. So there's a real impact. And Elisa, what have you seen, you know, when, and again, not people are screaming, yelling. It's not full hijacks, but these low degree hijacks where people just drop one marker.
Well, I go back to the fight or flight piece, Bill, and flight is just as bad as fight, because when your organization becomes mute or when people don't feel like that they can speak up or say something, that just kills innovation. It kills any potential for options. So, so many times we think about the amygdala reacting in terms of that fight mode where people might get defensive, but I always worry more so about the individuals who aren't talking and why aren't they talking? What's happening? Because we need to hear the voices. So.
Oh, you're so right, and I'm so glad you brought that up, because I do tend to have more of a fight response, so that tends to be what I think about. But yeah, I mean, that whole idea of creating psychological safety where people are willing to take risks, where people are willing to fail. If they're feeling shut down, if they're feeling like they can't speak up, that's just, you know, that's gone. Okay, well, we want to do another activity here. We want you to start thinking about, well, what are some of the things that trigger you? So we're going to do a poll, and we've got 3 examples. So I'd like you to answer, you know, I feel triggered when, and you can do, you know, almost always, often, occasionally, not often, almost never. 1, when I feel like I have the right idea and people aren't listening. I receive criticism or difficult feedback. Right? Do I get defensive or am I very open to it? And here's a good one. When a boss asks me for something I don't think can be done or done well enough in the time given. Like, you know, when our boss is ever realistic, right? They want everything done fast. So we're going to give you a moment to go through and say, you know, which of those things are triggers for you? You know, and different things are different for different people. So we'd love to get your feedback and have you think about that for a moment. All right, what do you think, Elisa? Are we giving people enough time to go through that?
I think so.
All right, so Casey, let's see the results. I'm interested to hear how people rank these. We're interested to see. Love data. We love data, as you can tell at IHHP. We love data and brain science at IHHP, combined with a soft skill like emotional intelligence. Okay, so I feel like I have the right idea and people aren't listening. Okay, so 45% of you are in often and almost always, and a number of you, you know, a larger percentage not. Okay, that's a good one. I receive criticism or difficult feedback. Okay, again, we've got some occasionallys, and then, you know, only 21% of you are not often or almost never. Only 1 person is almost never. So good for you, because that's pretty amazing. That's pretty rare. Here's the other thing you'll find, particularly with the receiving criticism and feedback. It really depends who it's coming from. So if it was coming from one of your exceptional leaders who you knew supported you, had your best interest in mind, you'd be more likely to, you know, want to hear it. Whereas if it's from, you know, a person you have a difficult relationship with that you don't like or trust, you know, and again, that comes back to, you know, organizations need to be able to, leaders need to be able to give people feedback. Well, if they're viewed as one of the more exceptional leaders, which we see as EI based, you know, we know that'll work better. Okay, when a boss asks me for something I don't think can be done or done well enough in the time given. So again, we've got, you know, a number of you who say occasionally, and again, that can be situational. Like if they ask me on a day where I'm feeling completely overloaded, that might be different than on a day when I feel like I got everything under control, I have time. So these things are also very situational. And the real goal in the learning here is to be able to identify your triggers so that you can A, work on minimizing them, and B, be aware that when they come up, you feel that first marker go, you say, oh gosh, okay, I feel like people aren't listening to me. You can do something before you lose the next marker and the next marker. All right, Elise, any thoughts or comments there before we move on?
I think this is good in terms of for the poll. It is in the continuation of the theme here of the self-awareness. I know we haven't gotten quite to the influencing others yet, but the self-awareness is so foundational and so critical. And, you know, how you take in feedback, how you give feedback, you know, that self-awareness, I just can't emphasize enough in terms of understanding where you're going with what are your own triggers. I know what my triggers are. I communicate that with my team anytime I'm going into a new team or with leaders. Here's what I know triggers me. And when you see X, you know, make me more aware if this is happening. So I used to go in, because I'm a big, deep thought processor, and I would have people tell me, one time I had a couple of colleagues say, you know, you look at me at times as if I'm stupid or dumb. Your face turns a certain way. And I'm like, wow, I did not mean that at all. I think you're very bright. And once they described what was happening to my face, it was like, oh, I am processing. I have this processing face. And so now I just make people aware of that. If I have this, while you're talking, if I get these different, you know, face changing, if you're seeing that, it's not you, it's me. I'm a processor. So, but not knowing what that impact had on people was, you know, I just wondered how many people then had concerns about, you know, where I didn't make that connection and I could have. So now having that greater self-awareness and what triggers others, what triggers me is really, really great in terms of building that trust, getting back to trust and listening.
Yeah, and how great to get that feedback. And by the way, it takes emotional intelligence for people to feel safe to give feedback. So that's an example. My favorite quote on the whole idea of self-awareness and emotional management comes from Dorothy Neville, an English poet. She said, the real art of conversation is not only to say the right thing at the right time, but to leave unsaid the wrong thing in the tempting moment. Funnily, she said that in 1913. So before social media or text or anything like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so, you know, we do spend the lion's share of the time in our training on self-awareness, but I don't want to leave folks without some tools around emotional management and emotional connection. So what I want to do is just take a moment now and hear from those in the audience, because you've all had amygdalas all your life. I don't think anybody's choked anybody to death yet. You may have wanted to, but you haven't. So you've learned some strategies. And for this one, we're going to take a bit of a risk here and try something. We'd love to go to the phone lines. And actually hear from some folks, what are their strategies to soothe the amygdala? And Casey, if you could let folks know how to put their hand up, we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, so you should see a button at the bottom of your screen that says raise hand. If you want to share, just click on that and we'll give you permission to speak. So the first person that we have is Bobby.
Hi, Bobby. Bobby, can you hear us? Always good to try technology. Bobby, you there? All righty, well, I'm so sorry, Bobby. I really, really appreciate your willingness to speak up, but we didn't get the technology working. Who else is brave enough to try the technology? Casey, do we have anyone else?
Not yet.
Okay, so, and I promise the technology normally works for those of you who want to try.
Yeah, we've got, nope, they've put their hand down again.
Oh, all right. They were just testing the button. All right, well, we've got to keep things moving. So I'm going to share a strategy that we developed initially with the US Navy over 20 years ago. IHHP has been doing this work for 20 years. We've since refined it with work in other branches of the military, work with Olympic athletes, and of course with executives and Fortune 500 companies, and awesome people like Elisa. And it's called the SOS. And we've intentionally used the SOS metaphor because it's kind of like when we're triggered, when we've dropped a marker, our amygdala has taken over, we're not thinking clearly, and we're moving to default behaviors that are typically going to get us on that poor leader list, get us on that, we're going to be stifling agility and innovation. So we need that life preserver. The first part of the strategy is stop. And that's about disconnecting from the trigger. When you're alone, that means, get up, go stretch, change your body posture. The draft folder was designed for emotional intelligence. So write that email you want to send that person. Don't put it in the to list just in case. Save it to the draft folder. If you have time, go do something that gives you some sense of calm and peace. Listen to music, pray, exercise, draw, whatever gives you some sense of peace. And then you come back to it an hour later and you're like, wow, thank goodness I didn't send that email. Now, there's times when we're on a conference call or we're in a meeting or, we're talking to our partner or spouse and we can't just leave. That'll have a really negative impact. So how do you stop? Well, there's some very interesting things you can do. For example, did you know that you can't cry and drink water at the same time? Maybe not so useful in business. Pretty useful with young kids, though. If you can get them to drink water while they're crying, it actually stops them crying. It's a brilliant strategy and actually really works right up until they figure out that that's your strategy. No, Daddy, I won't drink water. But it demonstrates the soothing effect of water. So in any situation, you can just stop and take a drink of water. Another couple things, your limbic system will actually, your amygdala will actually start to curl your fingers, maybe not into a full fist. So open your palms if you feel your fingers curling. If you are in a fight mode, you're going to find yourself leaning forward. Just lean back. If you're finding yourself in a flight avoidance mode, you might be leaning back, you might be protecting, open up and lean forward. Doesn't mean you have to step in right in that moment, but that change in your physiology will actually give you that disconnect from the trigger. Now, for whether you stop for 6 seconds, 6 minutes, 6 hours, during that time, oxygenate. The intake of a large amount of oxygen carbonizes your blood, which has the physiological effect of limiting the impact of the chemicals the amygdala has released. So you're fighting chemistry with chemistry. So everyone do it right now. Just stop and take a deep conscious breath. If you do nothing else as a result of this time together, but the next time that person says that thing, you get that email or you get criticized, you just stop and take a deep breath. You'll find yourself able to better show up more skillfully. You'll get some of that working memory, some of those markers back. You won't be so reactive and judgmental. You won't be feeling the need to avoid. You'll be able to step in. And finally, we seek information. And in particular, we seek information that can help calm the amygdala. For example, is this wind or tiger? Am I amplifying the negative? I'm assuming the worst. Because so often that's what we do. All right. Elisa, talk to me about your experience using the SOS strategy.
Yeah, every day I use SOS. It's become somewhat unconscious incompetence, though. I mean, when you start to practice this, so it is every morning. Even I start off with 10 minutes of mindfulness to kind of frame my day. So that gets back to what you deem as, I remember you in our sessions, Bill, talking about chemical reacting to chemical. Mm-hmm. And then in terms of the oxygenating, I have my app on my watch as well that reminds me to breathe, because again, we take in so much throughout today, and that cortisol builds up, that chemical of cortisol, and oxygen is another chemical that is fighting that chemical. So that whole brain science piece is something that I really practice on a daily basis.
Yeah, and when we do that, it just opens our minds back up so that we can be more agile, that thinking quickly. It's that slow down to speed up so that we get our memory back. We can be more creative. We can listen. So seek information is also about connecting with other people. So I hope you have some moments coming up, some situations, maybe some relationships where you can plan to apply the SOS strategy. All right, I did want to talk a little bit about emotional connection. I mean, it's the most important thing, honestly, is that we do these bottom two parts of the model, because that's the modeling, that's the, owning how we show up. That's the thing we have the most control over, but we can also influence and coach others and show up in a way that really drives inclusiveness and innovation. And just coming back to why this is so challenging, final statistics on the survey, you said only 19.8% of you agreed or strongly agreed that the majority of leaders in your organizations are able to manage change effectively. Again, because they're not doing the emotional intelligence part very well. We have a feedback-rich culture. Well, again, if we need innovation and innovativity and high performance, we need that. In my organization, we engage in productive conflict and debate during discussions. Only 10.7% of you agree or strongly agree. I mean, but that's the stuff we need, right? Sword sharpens sword, right? We need people challenging ideas to be creative and innovative. It's just, we need neocortexes, cognitive brains doing it, not amygdalas. All right, so what do you do though if you're in a situation where, maybe you've managed yourself, but someone else is a little triggered, or there's some tension in the room? Well, there's lots of strategies on how to do that. We have a full day of training on that. But what I really want to leave you with is this idea of the power of the question.
Yeah.
And here's why questions are so powerful. Statements trigger the amygdala of the other person. Oh, you need to do it this way, or you didn't do this. And by the way, it's actually their amygdala that decides whether you're making a statement or asking a question. So for example, why are you such a jerk? Question or statement to the other person's amygdala. That's a statement, right? Or, hey, why didn't you think of doing it this way? Okay, technically that's a question, but the amygdala of the other person is going to take that as a statement. You idiot, you should have done it that way. So this is why we have to be managing ourselves, because if we ask a question, but we're down a marker and we're coming across a bit reactive and judgmental, it gets perceived as a statement. Whereas genuine, probing questions, what do you think? God, what's that been like for you? Tell me your thoughts on this. Where we're genuinely probing, it requires their neocortex to engage, which automatically soothes their amygdala. So by staying calm yourself and by asking good probing questions, not only do you calm and soothe the other person's amygdala so their brain can open up, but now they start sharing their ideas. They start feeling safe, right? They're able to give you feedback, all these things we've talked about. So what we really want you to do is that SOS, is that stop, that oxygenate, seek information. What can I be doing? Is this winter tiger? And then seek information of others by asking good probing questions. Mm-hmm. And that's what creates that true collaboration and innovation. Because, William Wrigley Jr. said, when two people are in business always agree, one of them is unnecessary. If we're going to have innovative, agile, high-performing organizations, we need that, that constructive conflict and debate that right now is only at 10.7% view. We need that up. I mean, it's never going to get to 90 or 100%, but if that can be at 30 or 40%, what a huge difference it can make. And as you're seeing, what's going to drive that is emotional intelligence. Okay, the final part of emotional intelligence is personal leadership. And there's a lot in there. That's where you take meaningful risks. That's where you have tough conversations. It's also where you take responsibility for your own learning. So you've been given some insights and some learning. There's lots of opportunities that I'm going to share in just a moment for you to continue the learning. But before we do that, Elisa, you've done such a great job of sharing your own personal experience at putting this into practice. And that's one of the things I love about working with you. And you've also had a lot of great experience with rolling out emotional intelligence training programs to help drive innovation and agility and performance. So I thought folks here might be interested in what are some of the best practices you've seen if someone here maybe is on a learning and development or HR role and wants to roll out emotional intelligence training in their organization.
Yeah, I think that one of the best practices I've always found is with any kind of learning is finding that business champion. And I know that may sound redundant for some, so for some leaders or practitioners in the talent development space, but it is so critical. Here's how this works. In a large organization I was in not all that long ago, one which Bill, is we had a senior leader in one of your emotional intelligence sessions, and she came back and said, hey, I want all of my customer service people to go through emotional intelligence. That's that was thousands of people.
Mm.
And so that is, that ripple effect of the leader and someone who engages with emotional intelligence and can be that champion is really critical. Here at Brown and Tolan, our CEO, she's a big advocate of emotional intelligence and building that into the culture. Knowing that, we'll be more agile and more innovative if we just have this built in. So I think that more and more organizations and companies are really seeing the value of focusing on emotional intelligence with all the research that is out there. So bringing the research to the table. People are moving up in their career development areas. I mean, what separates great individual contributors to becoming a leader and a solid leader is that emotional intelligence piece. So build that into your curriculum from a career development standpoint as well. So those are some of the best practices that I would say.
Great. And by the way, I mean, these are going to stay on after the hour. We'll close off, but we'll stay on for some more Q&A because I know there are more best practices. By the way, one of the ones, I learned from you and others is that those emotional intelligence programs are not kind of on an island by themselves. They're integrated with the other learning. So you're doing design. A lot of people are doing design thinking now. Well, okay, how does EI enable design thinking? Maybe you're doing a trust and collaboration training, executive presence. It's really tying them all together so it's an integrated learning experience.
Yeah, I think that's a great call out, Bill, is that anytime learning is brought in, it's got to be tied to your organization's imperatives and the strategies, or linked to some pretty big initiatives you're having with talent development. So building that and having that not be separate but integrated in is really and important.
Great. All right. Well, thanks. It looks like almost everybody has stayed with us for the full hour. I just want to remind you, I hope what you're walking away with is understanding why emotional intelligence is such a leverage for agility and innovation. I mean, the survey data shows it's not easy. So if your organization is struggling with it, you're not the only ones. That amygdalas, yours and others, can really derail best selves. The SOS strategy can really help you stay calm so that you can be more agile and inclusive. The power of the question to get innovation and agility and collaboration out of your teams. And I hope you got some best practices from Elisa, both personally and for your organization. The quick advertisement, our website has lots of great information on it. For attending the webinar, you're going to receive what we call a survival toolkit. Lots of great follow-up items. On our website is a free pressure quiz, a what is emotional intelligence page with videos. We have lots of white papers. There's a great one called All Change is Personal. We have public training programs. So for those of you who work at organizations that aren't rolling out our training, we have those. We have keynotes. So sometimes, it's a leadership event or a sales meeting where, okay, you don't have a full day, but there's 2 hours. And that's sometimes where we start. We've got the full training. By the way, we deliver our training both virtually and in classroom. I love to share quotes, latest research, articles. If you share something cool, I'll like it. I'm on LinkedIn. And finally, so huge thanks to the IHHP marketing team, Casey and Diane and everybody who shared it. And Elisa, big thanks to you for being such a passionate, supporter of our work and for coming on and sharing your insights. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, it was fun, Bill. Thank you, as always.
Great. All right. So for those of you that have to log off, enjoy the rest of your day. For those that want to stay on, if there are any kind of additional questions you want to ask, I'd be happy. Oh, actually, I can see we have one right here. So Elisa, from Lionel, he said, can you please speak a bit about emotional intelligence and customer service?
Well, yeah. When we think about your framework in EI and that emotional connection, so for us and in the organization where we had it with our customer service, you're working with members and patients and helping them solve some of their complex challenges that they're working through. And the service that they get is the difference between whether or not they're going to come back to you, in the healthcare arena anyway, as a member. And so I think that emotional intelligence is huge on the customer service side, whether it's virtual or in person, because it's about making a connection with that other person, really listening and understanding to, what their problem is in that moment so that you can really help solve it. And without you getting defensive or concerned based on, or overwhelmed based on what they may be calling you about with either their questions, concerns, or issues. So it's about being able to really be able to make that customer experience greater for that individual who's calling in when we talk about it in that context.
Yeah, thanks, Elise. I have a couple additional thoughts on that. I always think when I'm on like a technical support line and I'm with that person who is totally disengaged, doesn't really want to be there, is going through the motions, versus the one that really seems like they're interested and engaged. I mean, you can hear it in their voices, right? So, and if that person just got reprimanded by their boss in a really negative way, well, you can't then expect them to turn around and connect with a client. So it's both the emotional intelligence of that customer service person, but also their leadership.
Yeah.
The second thing I'll say is I did customer service training. This is going a way back, but for Harley Davidson. Now, I want you to imagine the phone calls that a Harley Davidson rep gets on a Monday morning from some of those motorcycle riders whose motorcycle broke down over the weekend and they couldn't go on their ride. That ability to remain calm. So when somebody's coming at you and getting upset and aggravated, to remain calm and calm them and ask probing questions to get them to calm down is incredibly powerful in the experience of that person.
Absolutely. De-escalating them. Mm-hmm.
De-escalating and the empathy piece. So yeah, there's such a connection. All right. So I'll just stop and see. Let's see if we have, if anyone else, I see some folks are still on, which is great. And I hope I pronounced your name, Celia. She says, thank you very much. I enjoyed this webinar. Well, you are quite welcome. We have fun doing it. Even if nobody was listening, Elisa, you and I would have fun.
That's right. I know. I could talk about this all day.
Yeah. And we do whenever we get together.
Yes.
Alrighty. So, hey, huge thanks to all of you. And again, to Elisa, I want to wish all of you good courage in both working on your own emotional intelligence and leveraging it to drive innovation and agility in your organizations. Take care, everyone.